Welcome to this episode of Social Mobility Talks. Thank you for joining us, and a special thanks to our guest for today, Claire Thorne. Claire is the co-CEO of Tech She Can. It's a UK tech skills and social mobility charity, bridging industry, policy and education to tackle the tech skills gap and to get more women into tech sectors, which we are all here for. So I'm going to hand over to Claire now to introduce herself and the fabulous work that you're doing at Tech She Can, and then we'll get into the questions. So Claire, thank you so much. Please let us know a little bit about you, your background, and Tech She Can.
Thanks, Resham. So good to be here. So I have a few different roles. I'm, as you say, co-CEO of Tech She Can, tech careers education and social mobility charity. We're fully funded by industry, and everything we do within 4 state schools across the UK is free. I'm also advisor and venture partner at an organisation called Deep Science Ventures, and we are a UK-based but global venture creator. We build deep tech companies, science companies, in-house from scratch. Many of them you may have heard of, Mission Zero, etc. I sit on the council for the Foundation for Science and Technology, and I'm a member of the Sutton Trust Task Force on Social Mobility. And really, I care about opportunity for all. I care about equitable pathways and enabling social mobility. My background is in innovation strategy at UK universities. Did that for a number of years at Imperial and elsewhere. But yeah, this is my bag.
Well, it's a big bag, a heavy bag, lots in there. So thank you so much for finding the time to talk to us. I'll start with hopefully an easy but big question. Why is it so important to have more women in the tech industry?
I think ultimately to create a world that works for all of us and not just some of us. It's essentially part of, that phrasing, that wording is part of the core mission statement of the charity. I think we all know the business case for why diverse teams, particularly those that are gender diverse, but diverse in all senses, works. But the question that we ask many of our member organisations, our industry partners, and we urge children and teachers that we work with to ask is, tech is shaping our world, not just tech in general, but AI specifically at the moment, but who is shaping tech? And the who part is the bit that we're super focused on. We know that 1 in 4 workers in tech at the moment are women, just 1 in 4. And we know that when it gets to leadership level, that drops to 1 in 10. And of those 1 in 4, 1 in 3 are actively planning to leave. So there is a really urgent, critical skills gap in the UK around the technology workforce, and particularly making that a diverse workforce. There's a real need. And we see at Tech She Can, we bridge education and industry, as you said. So we see the demand side from our industry partners and that critical tech skills gap. But we also see the supply side, and we see the realities in the classroom as well.
So I'd love to pick up on the point you just made about 1 in 3 1 in 3 women actively planning to leave, because so often we talk about the barriers that women face coming into the tech sector, and obviously the huge implications that has for social mobility, given it's such a not only just a well-paid sector, but also, as you say, a sector that will, through its outputs, influence every element of our lives. But we don't often hear much talk about women leaving the industry or why they aren't being kept. So can you give us a bit of information about both sides? Why they aren't coming in and why they're leaving?
So the part that we as a charity focus on trying to fix is the entry point. So we start very young, we start from age 5 and we stick with them, which is the important bit, to be sticky and stick with them, boys and girls, but just not actively putting the girls off through to post 16, 18 onwards. The bit around retention for early talent, mid talent, senior talent, that's less the piece that we work across. But there are so many other partners in this space that do that bit. There's a recent report, the Lovelace report, that focused on some of that around like the reasons for women leaving. So yeah, that's less our focus. Our focus is more on the reason why girls in particular are being switched off from STEM subjects generally, and maybe not accessing or not being inspired to consider and pursue technology subjects. It's the school age piece that we really try and focus on, because we know our research shows that gender and disadvantage have a multiplying effect. And we know that from about age 7 onwards, we've lost the girls from STEM subjects. So we intentionally start early.
And what's happening, because we at the Social Mobility Commission have done, we did a campaign on parenting last year, looking at the importance of the early years and the setup of families in terms of how they educate their children in different ways. I actually sit on the board of the Foresight Society too, so they've done work both on the tech culture, tech bro issue, but also on how we parent children differently based on whether they're boys and girls. So what's happening before 5 or before 7 that means you're saying we're losing girls at that age? And how is that particularly entrenched in disadvantaged families?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, so we did a piece of research more recently that looked at the surveyed a number of primary school teachers and tried to understand what their view of children's perceptions and gendered stereotypes around STEM careers were at primary age. And what we were seeing is this happens before primary age. So it happens in early years settings, which we know that anecdotally from all the work we're doing anyway. There's so much. I mean, Mary Porter's wrote a really great book. I love it and I always reference it. There's so much she talks about it just being in the ether. It's just around us, and you can point to specific things, but actually it's a general sense that maybe you don't belong and it's not for you. So it's an inspiration, an aspiration, and a tech skills gap issue, but ultimately it's about culture and belonging. I recently found an old diary of mine in a garage, in my garage, and it was from when I was about 14. So it was around the time I was doing work experience placement. And I know that for those that are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, low socio-economic backgrounds, only I think it's 40% don't secure a work experience placement. So it's not even equitable. Not everybody gets access to it, which is obviously a huge problem. But I was, I suppose, one of the lucky ones, and that was not as a result of a system that worked. That was as a result of one individual teacher that was inspirational and really championed me and went out of his way, and my D&T teacher at secondary school, to find me that placement. And anyway, I found this, it was just a couple of weeks ago, I found this diary entry, and this was really my first proper experience of the workplace. And it was alarming because in it, I talk about how I was in this work experience placement. It was in the motor industry. It's a male-dominated workplace. But, my background is in physics, so I've been around that anyway my whole life. And as a 14-year-old, it was shocking because I write about how my teacher, that inspirational one who'd secured me the place, came to visit, because they always have to come and visit you in the workplace. And on that day, we were walking through the car assembly line, and I got wolf whistled like loads. And it's just the sort of thing that growing up as a young girl and a teenager happened all the time. But the fact that it happened with my teacher present in a workplace while I was 14, I was just like, this is my first experience of what the workplace is. And I didn't realise I'd written about it, but discovered that diary later.
The element that you say is nebulous I think is so relevant when I think about tech. I find it really fascinating, and it upsets me that Alexa, which is about delegating administrative tasks in essence, we call Alexa a woman, and yet most people's default for something like ChatGPT is to talk about it as a male. Oh, I asked it and he said, if you personalize it. And I'm like, that's really fascinating to me, that when it's about delegating work or kind of administrative elements, we call the item a woman. We give it that gender. But when it's about information and analysis and
rigor and science and intellect. Yeah.
Yes. And there's also loads of research showing that when you ask primary school children, to draw what they think certain roles are, if you ask them to do a CEO, they'll draw a man. And if you ask them to, and actually even that, as you say, it's the challenge of how do you tackle that in the early years.
Yeah. So we have experience of that through Tech She Can. So often when our team of educators, our team of qualified teachers are delivering our Tech We Can lessons in schools virtually or in person, they will do work before and after the lesson and say, try and understand how those perceptions have changed. And there was one case of a young girl, and she was asked to draw, the whole class was asked to draw who they thought a worker in tech looked like, just draw them or describe them, label them. And lots of people had said things like white middle-aged man in a basement, 5 screens, hacking into the Pentagon. And you think, where has this come from? And it's like osmosis. It's cultural osmosis where, Jurassic Park or something, and they've got this image of what it means to work in tech. So tech absolutely has an image problem. And you mentioned tech bros and there's cage fights, etc. And then after the work that we'd done with her, we asked to repeat the exercise, and she drew herself. And she drew herself with her natural hair. She drew herself with a cape. She had connected her passion, because that's how we always start, like, what are your passions, what are your hobbies? And there's a tech role for you if you want it. She connected her passion, which was particularly languages. And she had identified a role in an organisation like Meta. And she was totally transformed, and she was suddenly thinking, well, how was I supposed to know this was an option? And that's the point. You didn't, and that's why we exist.
That's fantastic. And I'd like to loop back. You mentioned that if you're a girl or a young woman from a disadvantaged background, and obviously we care a lot about the element of disadvantage, how does that double down? What impact do you see that disadvantage having, and how do you tackle that?
Yeah, I think when you look at representation in the tech workforce, you mentioned Alexa, for instance. So language and representation absolutely matters. You'll see me post on LinkedIn and do keynotes and stuff about this topic of belonging, culture, language, image, representation. So when you think about Sky's voice, there was a piece in Computing magazine that I commented on, which was saying that actually this is not just about a voice. This is about a voice that lives in the pocket of potentially many young girls. And what messages are we sending them? So if we want responsible, inclusive technology, it has to be built by all, but it has to. If we want safe, responsibly developed technology, it has to be inclusive technology. And inclusion ultimately is a choice about who's in the room and who isn't. And when you're thinking about those that are disadvantaged groups, those underrepresented in the tech workforce, it's on everybody, public, private sector, to ensure that the talent coming through is really representative. Otherwise, we just get tools and products and services that don't reflect us all and are exclusive. We did our first and hopefully annual AI Summit for schools in March this year around International Women's Day in partnership with Accenture. And we had a Minister for AI, Ferial Clark, we had OpenAI, NVIDIA, we had role models from all these great organisations, including many of Accenture's partner organisations, JLR, Chanel, Adobe, Microsoft, Barclays, etc. And we invited and hand-selected 240 girls, year 8, so just before their GCSE decision point, to join us on that day with their teachers. And it was a mix of main stage speakers, really content-rich, and festival-like zones, so interactive hands-on they could create. We showed them that technology is inherently creative and it can be for social good, because they're the 2 main career drivers for girls from our research, and they're the 2 things that they don't associate with technology careers. And at the start of the day, they're always really emotional days, you can see that they don't necessarily have the confidence to contribute even amongst their peer groups. And so they were all from 8 schools in education investment areas, as we used to call them. And at the end of the day, it was just a sea of hands up, totally engaged. Quantitatively, we saw an increase in the number of girls that day that went away wanting to pursue computer science as a GCSE option when they choose their options. Qualitatively, we heard stories like, I didn't realise so many people cared about us. And I think when you look at the representation in tech workforce, particularly around AI, development, deployment, testing, regulation, etc., it's very London-centric, all of the conversations, very male-centric, very white, middle-class-centric. And so this group of girls, ethnically diverse, low socio-economic backgrounds, etc., they just would never have thought that this is a possibility for them until we showed them the options, until we said this is a space in which you can belong.
Wow, that's fantastic. Looking forward to seeing those girls in 10 years as they influence the workspace. How fantastic that you've given them that kind of nudge into a career path they didn't think was possible. So I'd love to come back to kind of on the tech element. You've talked about the importance of the diversity in that. But how can tech help us, in your view, to tackle some of those social mobility issues? How can we utilize tech to increase opportunity and to make sure that we are being more inclusive in terms of opening up potential for people to access their true potential and to be able to achieve what they want?
It absolutely can be an enabler if it's used in the right way, and if it's really trying to reach those groups that everybody says is hard to reach and actually they just haven't tried. So for instance, we do many different things at Tech She Can, but we do this, one of the things we do is a series of live virtual lessons, which obviously would not be possible without webinar technology. And we are racing to keep up with demand. So they're for primary and for secondary age, free for everybody, no login for teachers. Parents also can access them, and homeschoolers. And they're on various different subjects throughout the year. We do them regularly, and we do them in partnership with industry. So we feature predominantly female relatable role models, early career stage. They're closer in age to the children that we're reaching. And just on Safer Internet Day, we did one on cyber, sponsored by the RAF Charitable Trust, who we work with, and it reached 60,000 children in one day. So we're 4 years old as a charity, established in 21, and racing to keep up. We did one the year before for Safer Internet Day, although we do these every few weeks, but just picking out Safer Internet Day. And we did that with Accenture on AI, generative AI, and that reached 45,000 on one day. But then we continue to redeliver. So schools and students are really desperate for this content. It's inclusive, inspirational, and modern. It's what's happening in the workplace now or in the future workplace. Tech careers inspiration and careers education. So I think technology is an enabler to be able to do that and reach large amount of children in one go is fantastic. But
those numbers are incredible. Well done, because that's amazing. I will definitely log on to see your future ones. Mine is 13 months old, so a little young, but I'll let him know the lessons in the future. I mean, I'd love to talk about that actually, because you referenced the early years. So what is it? What would your advice be to parents, of girls, of children who, they might be growing up in, in areas where they might feel the schooling isn't quite as modern or focused on the future or jobs of the future? What would your advice be? How can we make sure that parents know what they should be doing to prevent cutting off a future in tech if their children wanted it?
I would say focus on durable skills. So the idea of learning how to learn and learning how to relearn, understanding complex systems, critical thinking. These are all things that you're going to need in any role. And really understand the breadth of opportunities across science and technology. It's in everything and it's in all future roles. 65% of children today will do jobs that don't currently exist, but science and technology will almost certainly be in and across everything. For tips around careers inspiration or careers education generally, just understanding the sense that science and tech is inherently creative. I think maybe when we were at school, I'm probably slightly older than you, there was a sense that you were either artsy or sciencey and you weren't both. And I loved everything. I loved all of that. And I didn't want to have to choose. And obviously I chose a science path. But actually, I think that thinking has changed a lot. We need both. When you're thinking about adoption, regulation, ethics, etc., we need both, and it's an asset to have both. So encourage both of those strengths in your children or in your classmates. I would say you don't have to choose. There's not one role or one path, because obviously many of those jobs are undefined currently, and you can do lots of different things at the same time. The workplace has already changed a lot. For me, the thing that I've found really powerful, coming from a background where I grew up, when I was younger, I wanted to be an astronaut and a brain surgeon, because these things had uniforms and they were visible and they were on my TV screen. That's all I knew, and it's all I was shown. And obviously I didn't know a brain surgeon and I didn't know an astronaut, so I never knew how to get there. But for me, finding a champion, somebody, it could be a teacher having an inspirational teacher having a 2-minute conversation with you saying, why don't you think about these subjects at A-level? Or it could be somebody in your first role who really sees that you're driven and champions you and supports you. But find that champion, find that sponsor in the workplace. I feel that's been really valuable. And maybe I think for general public, which obviously includes parents, I think in the UK, our levels of science and tech literacy, public literacy, feel quite low. I don't have the data on it, but I would love there to be an ambition for the UK general public to be more science and tech literate. And then that would also help with things like AI adoption, etc. But this sense that science and tech is in everything, science and tech skills are portable and they can, open up the world. You can travel in your jobs, you can work with really diverse international teams, etc. And you can get well paid from it. We're not really selling those benefits at the moment and making those visible. And then lastly, on tech specifically, I think as an individual or a parent or a teacher, and I mentioned it before, seek out organisations like us because we do exist. And then as a corporate partner, potential partner, don't duplicate things in-house. Women in Tech initiatives, school outreach stuff, etc. Partner with those charities and public sector organisations like Technology Can that has already done a lot of the learning, has already done a lot of the testing of what works in classrooms and things. There's lots of ways to support the mission.
And in your experience, because obviously you're working with schools across the country, at the SMC, we're doing a lot of work thinking about place-based solutions because, we recognise that what works in one region, one city, one part of the country, you can obviously take lessons from it, but you have to really think about what the issues are in that area, whether it's the infrastructure, the school provision, the access to the internet, the cultural makeup, the community, etc., etc. In your experience, what do you kind of see the breadth of challenges across the UK, and where do you see differences? Are there areas where you feel like really that approach needs to be adapted? Rural areas, urban areas?
Yeah, we see it all the time. So, for instance, when we do our Career Insight Days, where we invite up to 100 secondary school age children physically into the workplaces of our partners, and we literally open their doors. We see all sorts of challenges, and they are very nuanced and very place-based. Sometimes there'll be young girls in particular at the end of the day are wanting to access and take the sanitary products in the toilets, wanting to take the leftover food. Pretty much all of them are on free school meals, so that we have to guarantee on the day that they're going to be fed. We have to buy out teacher time so the teachers can be released to come into the workplace with us. Otherwise, the children can't get there. We put on buses to physically bring them, make sure it's all there. So we remove all of those sort of barriers. And some of those exist anywhere in the UK. Some of them are more local and place-based. There was one example where we were doing a Career Insight Day in Greater Manchester with Kraken, and our team of teachers, the Technology Can education team, had to coach the young girls to be able to get into the lift because they hadn't been in a lift before. And this is secondary school age. And that's after the fact that we'd got them there on the day. And many of them, whether it's in Leeds, Birmingham, Manchester, London, wherever we do these, many of them maybe live 20, 30 minutes outside of a major city centre and they've never been into their city centre before. So just getting them there on the day to that workplace is a huge win. I think your point around that place-based approach, there was the recent Social Mobility Commission event at the RSA with Alan Francis and Andy Haldane, and I was there and I was listening. I really welcomed that nuanced regional approach because my sense, and I posted on LinkedIn about it at the time because I was so like, yes, finally somebody's saying this, because I feel like often we treat disadvantaged as one group. Often corporate partners that are prospective partners, and then we work with them and we change their thinking on this, but they sometimes CSR teams can have in private sector can have quite a lazy view on how to reach those hard to reach students, and it can just be free school meals, and it's not nuanced enough, and there needs to be another measure, which is why we were really pleased when the State of the Nation report came out, because we were like, finally a UK-wide metric that we can use. But free school meals isn't enough.
We totally agree.
Yeah.
And I will say very briefly for anyone watching or listening, we will be sharing links to the reports. We can't talk too much about State of the Nation 2025 because, well, not this moment, but by the time this comes out, people will be able to read it. So the great thing about the Data Explorer tool is it breaks down into 250 ish areas. So you can really get down into the local issues, and you can look at different measures of kind of social and economic deprivation to understand what the challenges are. Because, for example, we see that in London there are some very high indicators for deprivation, but equally it's one of the best places in the country to be from a deprived family, because actually the opportunity to achieve your potential is high. So it's about learning the lessons, but also recognizing that London in itself has a set up infrastructure, job sector that you can't necessarily replicate fully elsewhere, although of course we can try. So that's been super fascinating, Claire. Thank you. I'd like to talk a little bit about innovation, because that speech you talked about that our chair...
I did have some other things on that, if that's okay, to go back to it. Is that okay? It's the point around that nuanced regional approach. Yeah, absolutely. I think often we talk about schools and the UK or the education sector, and as if they're just one entity, and they look so different depending on where you are in the country. And it's almost like looking at the NHS, it's so decentralized, what those services look like, the access to IT infrastructure. For instance, some of the schools we work with have just transitioned from using OHPs, overhead projectors, and yet at the same time you had former administration talking about innovation nation, science and tech superpower, and the realities we see in the classroom every day, they just don't add up with that, and we see that the regional disparities. The other thing is, when we talk about the UK, actually I think we need to be more careful with our language and think about, well, what does the education look like in that space? What does the science and tech capability, and that could include public and private sector larger, what does talent look like, and what does infrastructure look like? And if you look more deeply, there's lots of innovation clusters that have been mapped by government as well. If you look more deeply, then you start to see that actually the UK is not one entity and it's not homogenous.
Totally agree, and it's fantastic that you've said that. I mean, one of the things that in the RSA speech you referenced earlier, one of the things that our chair Alan Francis talked about a lot was the place-based approach, but he also referenced innovation. And actually the SMC has a report, Innovation Generation, Next Steps for Social Mobility, where we really emphasize the importance of an innovative, dynamic economy for improving social mobility. So kind of the key idea that fostering technological advancement is central to creating higher quality jobs across a range of sectors, and that right now, of course, that kind of innovative economy is focused in London and the southeast, but about how we can challenge traditional pathways into those elite jobs. So you see a lot of talk about, let's just move the jobs outside London, which, okay, great, that's a great ambition, but we also think there needs to be a lot of focus on the data. So who are those jobs going to? Was it just people who are going to move down to London or up to London, and they now do those jobs in their hometowns, which is fantastic. That's a boost for the local economy. But what about the other people that weren't going to do those jobs in the first place? So I guess I'm really keen to hear your view on how innovation helps boost economic growth and social mobility. Where do you see that coming into it?
There was a recent article that myself and Deep Science Ventures colleagues published in the Foundation for Science and Technology journal on unlocking UK deep tech, essentially for economic growth. There's lots in there. Also, I guess we talk and we hear a lot about economic growth. It's the kind of buzzwords of this administration, isn't it? And recently in June, I was on stage at London Tech Week doing a fireside with Farrell Clark, Minister for AI. And my concerns are always good growth, and like, for whom? Who is this really benefiting? How is it equitable? How is it fair? How is it like UK wide? And I was sort of politely challenging Farrell on what we've seen, the AI Opportunities Action Plan. We've got the Incubator for AI. We've seen all of these things emerge and be launched recently. But how do we know in 5 or 10 years that this has really been a success and we've achieved what I view as good growth, and what is good growth? And I was really hoping for something like a description, even if there's no real KPIs against it at the moment, but a description of a connected, happy, healthy, thriving, educated society, something like that. And I didn't get it, and it's not a narrative I hear very often. I don't see anybody really championing that from private sector or public sector. I think all talk around technology as a route to economic growth at the moment feels very tech-led rather than very people-led or societal-led. And I'd like to see that shift a little bit.
Well, you mentioned not the private, not in the public, but I can say, I'll give a plug to the Open Data Institute. So we're in the not-for-profit sector, but we released just earlier this year a European-focused AI and data policy kind of piece of work that's really great, a manifesto. And last year we did one that was UK-focused ahead of the election. And there we do talk a lot about that focus on AI being around people and community and society, and actually that it has to be in service of people. So what can we do to make sure it's inclusive? What can we make sure to think about things like interoperability in a way that serves people? So I actually sit on the Government Smart Data Council. So we're looking at elements like that, because I think when you think about open banking, I see so many opportunities for tech to democratize access to services that 5 years ago, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, unless you were wealthy, you couldn't have really access to financial advice. You couldn't have access to savings advice. You couldn't have access to a lot of the services that wealthy people could, and you didn't even know they existed. And if you tell most people now about open banking, your average person won't know what that is or what that means, but they will know that they can, through their bank, connect to an app that helps them to save for a rainy day fund. I was talking to one of the big banks last week about their work on financial literacy and education, and they're talking about how they'll be able to give advice to people on you could, help improve your savings. So right now, you've got money sitting in your bank. It's actually a member of one of our economic growth and innovation groups, Jose from HSBC, and he was saying that if you had money in your bank account, in your savings account for the last 5 years and you did nothing with it, you'd have lost 25% of the value of it just from cumulative inflation. So it's about elements like that actually tech can help you to improve your life, but are we really thinking about the reasons why? Simple things like, okay, you want to work in tech. Do you know how to prepare for the questions at interview? And I've seen some consulting companies are now trialing sending out the questions you'll be asked in advance, because what they don't or shouldn't want to test is, do you know someone that was able to tell you how to prep for the interview? But actually, can you prepare? Can you think? Can you assess? Can you learn? Do you know how to do the job? Because all it tells you at the moment is that you knew someone in consulting. You didn't know a brain surgeon. You didn't know an astronaut. I mean, I know neither now as well. But but what would you have done differently if you'd known one? Well, actually, if you were told on the NASA website, or if you were told kind of on the NHS jobs website how to apply for those jobs, maybe you'd have had that career path open to you.
I was obsessed with ER and Horizon, and they were the two jobs that I loved and were visible to me. On your point around financial literacy, and I don't think it's just those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds that are disadvantaged. It's also particularly women, and particularly sort of late 30, 40 something women like myself. So there's a piece of work that Claire Thorne, Lise, no relation to me, is doing around something called the money conversation, and trying to open out and trying to inform and empower particularly 40 something women that maybe have no pension and are not financially literate, to provide financial security for them so they feel like they can engage in that world. I think your point around pre-sharing interview questions, etc. I think none of these challenges are unique to STEM, and they're not unique to the tech sector or tech industry. And there's so many learnings that you can take from other spaces. So, for instance, the way in which higher education has been compelled to, is been obliged to really open up access over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, and what they've done around attracting and in interviewing and retaining those from lower economic backgrounds. I think there's lots to learn that other industries could learn from them as well. So none of those are really tech-specific issues. They're systemic issues around access, inspiration, aspiration, connections, networks, and they're all, irrespective of what sector you want to work in or where in the UK come from, they're big things for us all to be solving.
Absolutely, totally agree. And when it comes to systemic issues, one of the things I get to talk about with both my hats on, ODI and SMC, is the data. Because you mentioned free school meals, and there is no single answer currently for a way to measure kind of disadvantage or to think about challenges. We know we talked a lot as the SMC about the work that's been done in the US by Raj Chetty to link family tax records with educational outcomes, so we can really see, because right now free school meals and what your parent did at 14 is kind of the measures we go by. How do you see the role of data in the work you do, other than free school meals? How are you collecting and tracking that, and what more would you find helpful to have, whether that's from schools or local or national government, to help you with the work you're doing?
I think in terms of how we qualify disadvantaged and lower socioeconomic backgrounds, it's been enormously helped by the State of the Nation report. I think before that we were working with many different measures. So the Social Mobility Index from 2017, the Welsh data set, the Scottish Index for Multiple Deprivation, and trying to bring them all together. And they all measure slightly different things in slightly different ways. So it's been so welcome to have that. We define our priority schools. We never turn a school away if they request a champion. One of our industry role models go into their classrooms, or if they want to work with us in any other way or access any of our resources. We don't turn them away, but we do, because we're a relatively small but fast-growing charity, we do try and prioritise where our team work in person in schools. And so we have priority schools that we absolutely want to reach. And of all the schools we work with, over 65% are our priority schools. And those priority schools are defined by your 4 categories in the State of the Nation report, where across all 4 categories, they are the most unfavourable or unfavourable. And we now have a way of searching by school postcode and really qualifying, okay, where are they in that metric. I think in terms of the role of data informing our work, it underpins everything we do. So everything we do has a social mobility lens to it. We collect qualitative data on perceptions change before and after, any interventions by TechSheCan or any of our strategic partners. But we also do longitudinal studies as well. So we have examples of industry funded projects at the moment that are live in 2 or 3 areas across the UK. There's one ongoing in Yorkshire, one in Coventry, and others about to launch, all sponsored by different strategic partners. So Coventry is Coventry Building Society, Yorkshire is Quicklime. And what that does is they fully fund a dedicated TechSheCan teacher to go back into the same schools over multiple years. And so they are reaching the same group of children for 3 or 4 years at a time, particularly their transition from primary through to secondary, and they're reaching maybe 1,000 children in those sort of 30 odd schools in that particular region. So it's talking about like sustained perception change, delivering again and again new Tech We Can lessons to them. So very soon we'll start to have that longitudinal data of what it means to stick with the children and really shape their pathways. And then the last piece is there's obviously stuff that informs the wider context, the kind of the need. So I mentioned before the 1 in 4 women, 1 in 4 workers in tech are women. All of that informs our work. I was at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona this year, and I heard is it Professor Lee Elliott from Exeter, I think it is, and he was talking about how 9% of the tech workforce are from low socioeconomic backgrounds, which is on a par with high court judges and actors, and these industries that we view as elitist, and yet the same conversations aren't happening around the tech industry. So these sort of adjacent context setting stats are super helpful to try and change the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, looking forward to seeing the result of your studies, and so glad the State of the Nation has been invaluable. Our Secretariat works very hard. They're a very talented but small team, so great to hear that. I'll pass on the value add there. And finally, if you look 10 years ahead, what would success for TechSheCan and for the UK social mobility and innovation landscape look like?
I think firstly for TechSheCan as a charity, we wouldn't exist. Our work would be done. We only exist because of those inspiration, aspiration and tech skills gaps. There's a piece that I wrote when was it? I think it was last year, in The Guardian, on the future of education. And it was a short piece looking fast forward in 10 years to then it would have been 2034, and envisaging a world in which you have STEM qualified teachers in every classroom. You have all of these other things that really support children to understand what the opportunities are. You have a curriculum that's modern and inclusive and features relatable role models from industry. You have all of these things happening, and then you're not really talking about tech skills anymore. It's just
skills. I love that.
And you're not really talking about women in tech anymore. It's just talent in tech.
Yeah, people in tech, love that. And yeah, we're very keen at the ODO. We talk a lot about data skills, data literacy, and people tend to talk about that only being necessary for children, but actually that needs to be at every level of society at every age.
Yeah, and in terms of that time frame, the challenge you set of in the next 10 years, actually there's an urgency. There's a patience required and a long-term commitment, particularly from private sector, to work with organisations like us in these solutions and stick with us for the next 5 or 10 years and see everything change. But there's also an urgency at the same time. And if you look at the skills gap, for instance, across the research base in the UK, across R&D and universities, something like 380,000 additional STEM researchers are needed by 2027. That's 2 years. And it's just crazy.
Not going to get those in 2 years without some serious focus.
Yeah, and that's to sustain 2.4% GDP. So yeah, where are they coming from?
Well, just as well we have you and Tech She Can. Claire, thank you so much for sharing your incredible insights with us. Thank you for the amazing hard work you're doing. Everybody do check out Tech She Can and all the brilliant work you're doing and all the free resources you're sharing. I think all schools should be signing up, although of course you want to focus on the ones that need it most. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. We referenced a number of SMC reports, so our State of the Nation 2025 recently came out. Do check that out, along with the Data Explorer tool. Our Regional Insight Strategy paper has also just come out, and our Economic Growth and Investment Group recommendations, which are fascinating, from a range of leaders across the UK that feed into that. So please do check out all of those reports. We'll share them in the comments below, along with some of Tech She Can's work. If you enjoyed the episode, please do help us in spreading the word. Share it with your friends and your colleagues, and you could give us a rating on Spotify or Apple, or a like on YouTube. And also please do subscribe to make sure that you don't miss an episode. We've got lots of guests just as fascinating and wonderful as Claire. Thank you so much for your time.